I didn't want to make this video, but I feel like I have to explain some things from my perspective. It isn't a pretty video, and it involves a lot of personal attacks as well as accusations of stealing from Jake Steiner. There'll be links to sections of this video in the description for easy navigation. 3 years ago, I messaged Jake about creating the Endmyopia wiki. With Jake's approval, me and the community got started on writing articles. The idea was that Jake would host the wiki, and the wiki would be free to use and share under a Creative Commons license. Over 3 years, the wiki really grew, with over 10,000 edits and over 200 articles. Many people have said it has been really useful in helping them improve their eyesight. On the 8th of May, the wiki was taken down, and every admin on the wiki that wasn't Jake lost their admin rights. According to Jake, this was due to legal reasons. Approximately 2 days later, the wiki is now being advertised as costing a minimum of $39 to access. In response, I exercised the legal right that is contained in the license of the wiki to take a backup of the wiki and put it onto a different server so people can still access it for free. Jake agreed to this license when he agreed to host the wiki. Ever since then, Jake has been posting loads of angry threads and messages about what I've done, which will be documented in detail with screenshots in this video. I've never been paid or employed by Jake. Anytime I've made something for the community, it's always in the spirit of trying to give back and help other people out. Over the 4 years I've spent in the Endmyopia community, there have been some disturbing things that I haven't really talked about. These issues have led me to lose personal trust in Jake Steiner. I have quite a bit of experience talking to Jake because I've had at least 60 private message conversations with him on the forum that can get quite long. Firstly, the way that Jake writes messages is very spicy and on edge at times. He often writes messages in a passive-aggressive tone. Jake handles advice or criticism very poorly and without maturity a lot of the time. He will often attack the person making the comment or make underhanded remarks. This has been the case for a very long time. Furthermore, when someone says something that he doesn't like in either the forum, the Facebook group, or some other avenue that he controls, he will often ban or remove those people. I would say that this removal of content goes beyond what a lot of people would describe as reasonable. I discovered fairly quickly that when talking to Jake, he would often see advice as criticism, and then he would become passive-aggressive and start being unsavory to deal with. This got to the point where, to work with him, I had to be deliberately two-faced and triple-check every message to make sure he wouldn't get offended. Secondly, Jake really does not like free content. Now, he has put a lot of great free resources out there, that is true. However, whenever he talks in the forum or in some of his Facebook promotions, he consistently identifies free content as an issue for him. This was particularly poignant in our private message discussions. Generally, he would prefer more compensation for his work, and he often jokes that people who use his work for free are called freeloaders. There will be examples of Jake hating free vision improvement content later in this video. I have to be clear that there is absolutely nothing wrong with wanting compensation for your work. Endmyopia is Jake's business, and he has the right to charge for paid content and make a living off of it. However, the idea behind Endmyopia is a simple one. In a nutshell, it is wearing weaker glasses and then going outside to improve your vision. Jake put these ideas into free blog posts and videos that people learned from. However, this doesn't mean Jake has a perpetual license to the ideas that he teaches. Furthermore, Jake isn't even the first person to come up with the reduced lens method. Ideas that are put out there for free are not perpetually owned by the copyright holder. They are just ideas. So just to be clear, Jake does own the copyright to his blog, his videos, and his paid courses. However, the idea of vision improvement is a simple one, and it's just an idea. It cannot be copyrighted. You can't own the copyright to the idea of reducing your lenses over time to improve your vision, and you can't own the copyright to material that adapts those ideas into a different format. Firstly, Jake sells a guide called Le Rough Guide. He says that this is a member-created resource with all the things that help them the most. I was in the forum at the time when community members were assembling this guide. As far as I'm aware, Jake did not contribute significantly to the writing of this guide. It was a big community effort with at least 7 participants, and everyone had their own section to write. That is, if I remember it correctly. Based on what some of the contributors said after the guide came out, it was clear that some of them had been misled to believe that the guide would be freely available. It was released at about $15, and currently it's on sale for $39. People were upset because they didn't know that the guide would cost money, and they were writing paid content for free. I would have liked to double check the sequence of events, but I can't because the thread is removed and unlisted, which means I can't check. It's very typical of how Jake operates. Secondly, I want to talk about the Short-Sighted podcast, which is Jake's podcast about Endmyopia. Details here in particular might just be speculation though. Jake had recorded about 50 plus podcast episodes with people who had improved their vision. The podcast was freely available on Spotify and other platforms. Recently though, the podcast was removed and became part of Jake's paid content that you have to pay to access. Now, Jake definitely has the legal right to take his podcast that he produced and make it paid content. However, I just hope he clarified to the people he interviewed or made them sign a contract or something that this is something he might do in the future. If I had gone on his podcast and this happened, I would have asked him to remove it because I would not have consented to becoming paid material for Jake to make money on. Now, I hope he made everyone sign contracts, but in the case that he didn't, and this is just speculation, it is quite unethical to make money out of these interviews. Okay, it's time to talk about the actual events that happened. I want to give you as much information as possible in a raw way so you can decide for yourself who you think is right in this situation. On the 8th of May of this month, I got an automated email from the Endmyopia wiki stating that my user rights had changed and I don't have any permissions anymore. I sent Jake a message asking what happened, and he said he was dealing with parents not being too happy that their kids were using resources on the wiki. I asked him if the whole of Endmyopia needed to become 18 plus. He said it seems like this is the case and that he's talking with lawyers. He also makes it clear that he doesn't want this to be public knowledge. I tell him that my lips are sealed, and I really meant it at the time. I never talked about his interactions with lawyers behind his back until he made it public knowledge, and I did want to keep to my word. However, people were messaging me concerned that the wiki was down, and I said that although Jake is handling it, I did have a backup available. 3 days later though, and my opinion of the situation has rapidly changed. In 3 days, Jake had already edited all of the sales pages to have reference to the new paid wiki. He put restrictions in place to make sure that you were a paying member before you could access the wiki. He also made a Facebook post including the wiki that is now paid, saying that it has over 12,000 edits, and also saying that yes, some of this stuff used to be free, but at this point, you know my perspective on how I think Jake handles community-made content, about how Jake rants and censors threads, and at this point, I've had enough dealing with this. From the outside looking in, nobody can actually verify that he has legal problems, and although it wouldn't be wise to talk about it in case it was true, it could still just be a falsehood. Given how much Jake talks about wanting compensation for his work, I did not put it past Jake to be lying in an attempt to paywall the wiki and potentially make more money. Because of this lack of trust, whether Jake's legal problems are real or not is ultimately not material to how I chose my next course of action. So, having made my mind up, I send one final message where I say that Endmyopia will always have these legal problems. Afterwards, I start writing what I actually feel, and this is probably the angriest message of the entire saga that I write. I say that monetizing the wiki shows contempt for the people who wrote it. Now, I want to emphasize that I really wouldn't have minded if the wiki just stayed down while Jake dealt with all the supposed legal issues. What annoyed me and some other people was the rush to change all of the marketing and to advertise the wiki as paid content so quickly after it was taken down for free. I know a lot of people have worked very hard on the wiki to make the content good. I didn't trust Jake, who said it was temporary and that the wiki would be coming back in a free form. This is because of his past actions with community content and his continuous complaints he makes about free content. Comments that he goes on to make later, which are also in this video, would vindicate that my belief was right. From my perspective at this point, there is no longer any reason to work with Jake. I didn't join this community to help Jake, I joined it to help people improve their eyesight. I decided at that point that I was going to fork and copy the wiki onto a new domain so people could still freely access it. You might be wondering though, is that copyright infringement? To answer the question over copyright, firstly, we need to discuss licensing. Licenses on content describe how that content can be used by other people, third parties. Endmyopia Wiki is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution-ShareAlike 4.0. Wikipedia is hosted under an older version of that same license. I'll link to a copy of the license in the description, but I'll read out a brief summary. You are free to share, copy, and redistribute the material in any medium or format. Adapt, remix, transform, and build upon the material for any purpose, even commercially. The licensor cannot revoke these freedoms as long as you follow the license terms. The license goes on to say that you need to attribute the original author or location it was hosted, and that any derivative works also need to be hosted under this same license. When making the wiki, I suggested to Jake that it be covered under this exact license. Jake agreed that this license was fine and gave his permission for it to be how the wiki would be licensed. This license was displayed on the front page, it was in the footer of every page, and anytime anybody edited an article, there would be a notice saying that they agree to release their contribution under this license. Everybody on the front page could see that the wiki was free to use and share the entire time the wiki was around. I recommended this license to Jake because I deliberately wanted to protect the contributions that the community would make. You can't revoke the license, and you can't prevent people from exercising their rights under the license. For example, Jake might have given up with Endmyopia and decided to shut everything down. That's perfectly fine to do, but under the license, if anybody's interested, they are allowed to host the wiki elsewhere. He might decide to place a paywall on it, which is what he did. That's perfectly fine, but under the license, anybody who's interested has the right to host the wiki elsewhere. This license wasn't chosen randomly, and I had strong reasons why I chose to recommend this license to him. He agreed to this license and these terms. Before I start on what was said online, I just want to say that pretty much every message or post that was written by Jake or other people has been unlisted or deleted in some way. Most of these messages that you're about to see were saved before this happened. Jake responded privately to me and was not happy. Around the same time, he made a thread on the forum called The New Wiki Fork. He states that due to legal reasons, he took the wiki down to avoid it changing while discovery was in progress. He says that he figured that he would put the wiki in the member section so that anybody who ever supported Endmyopia would be able to access it. He discusses what I told him about forking the wiki. He also talks about the philosophy of free versus paid content and how he's still working on new ideas to help people improve their vision. I respond by saying that hiding the wiki temporarily is understandable, but by quickly monetizing the wiki, it is unlikely that people will be interested in editing the wiki again. Jake says that the wiki is essentially a rewrite of Endmyopia's resources and that there is no right to steal or copy it. He says that making a copy of the wiki so quickly after his legal troubles is a bad faith action. In response to me saying the words, "We all got played," he says, "What an interestingly entitled and ungrateful statement. Without my decades of work and free help, you'd still have -5 diopter myopia." I reference the license again and state that I'm removing all content on the wiki that he is the copyright holder of. I say that the goals of the community are diametrically opposed to what Jake wants to do. Jake says don't be in my forum, and I say fair enough. He posts a message that would be deleted later saying that I am the person who made Endmyopia no longer be free in the future. Jake then bans me from the forum. Later in the same thread, Jake repeats that the copyright of the wiki is still Endmyopia, and that he owns the rights to the wiki. Jake goes on to say that my actions are asking for trouble. Jake then private messages me and says that it's not for me to decide what to do with his work and that I'm stealing from him. In my personal forum thread, some members ask why I have been suspended. Varakari, a long-term member of the community who created the centimeter measurement tool, responds. Jake makes a post which ends up with an impressive 39 edit count. Somewhere, when he was revising his message, he says that I will now be unbanned so I can respond to messages. He says I am on a massive ego trip. He says I don't give an F about his legal problems because my ego is more important. He says that the wiki is still ultimately based on what he wrote. He jokes about how people clicking on the like button on Varakari's post proves that communism still exists. Jake says the wiki is his resource. He then unlists the thread. Varakari says these actions may not be the best for the Endmyopia brand, and that any large community would have some people reacting like this. He says this is a PR and communication nightmare. Varakari states that he doesn't believe in hiding contentious topics and that it sets a dangerous precedent. In a message that would later be deleted, Jake says that this situation doesn't need to be in public and that he doesn't see a PR nightmare. He then says to Varakari that he should not have addressed the situation and spread gossip, and that Jake, he should have handled it. I step in and make a comment. I say that paying people to make content for Jake isn't as effective as community-driven content, and that the response to this situation will not make people happy about making content for Endmyopia in the future. I say that it is a shame that every other thread has to be unlisted, and I say that Jake cannot stand by his words. Jake reads this message and temporarily changes his view on removing messages from the public, and then he relists the thread while also closing it so that no further messages can be sent. This is after deleting a previous message that he wrote towards Varakari. Some days later, in another thread, I respond to someone mentioning the situation. I share a link to the new fork of the wiki, along with the email that Jake sent to everyone who previously contributed on the wiki. Jake responds in this thread by saying he only puts out free stuff if he likes it and chooses to, not because someone forced him. He says I have posted evidence of me stealing Endmyopia original works, that I have made a written intent of harming the financial viability of Endmyopia, and that I have linked to evidence. This exact post was edited 18 times before it would go on to be fully deleted. I think some of these edited messages show the kind of person that Jake is. He says that he is talking to the trademark attorney. He calls me by my name and says that it's going to be a lot more than a ban, and that I should come to my senses. He says that anybody who is smart will not have their name on the new wiki. In another edit, he suggests I should talk to my friends, if I have any, so that they can talk sense into me. He suggests I might have hit my head as well. He reiterates that I'm stealing his work and attacking his business while rubbing it in his face, and that I believe actions have no consequences. In another edit, he says that there might be something wrong with me. I might be sitting in a dark basement on my 16th Mountain Dew with caffeine shaking hands, while talking to myself playing video games for 16 hours, and that I need help. He says that I should talk to somebody because the situation is not okay and won't make my life any better. He says he very sincerely doesn't want to turn me into target practice for the lawyer. He compares me to the nuclear test towns that the United States used to use to test nuclear weapons, and says I'm in such a town and that there's an incoming nuke. He says though he's giving me a fair warning because he's actually worried about me though, and that I have credits left for enthusiasm because I tried to help Endmyopia in the past. He revises this message slightly in another revision and another revision after that. He finally says that I'm mistaking kindness for weakness and that is sad. He then proceeds to delete the entire post. Finally, I'm banned again for being too combative. Jake definitely thinks of it as his business and not as a shared resource that people can freely learn from. He is definitely entitled to make money from his work, but I think he's gone too far. I would like to draw specific attention to a message that Jake wrote. Here he says that I have a written intent of harming the financial viability of Endmyopia. Now this is interesting because I don't recall anywhere saying this. I honestly don't care about Jake making money. He's welcome to provide value for people in ways that don't involve misleading the community. Considering that I never wrote anything saying that I want Jake's business to fail, I can only assume that he's interpreting my link to the newly hosted wiki as a stated written intent that I want to damage the financial viability of his business. So I linked to the wiki that used to be free, and then it was paywalled due to legal reasons, and apparently this is me wanting to harm his financial viability. I think this is a Freudian slip by Jake. To me, it looks like that he did want to permanently paywall the wiki which was stated as free to use and share for 3 years. By hosting this content elsewhere, that is a challenge to his ideas of what he wants to do with his business, and that is why he wrote what he did. I have tried to give every message as much context as possible so that you can come to your own conclusions about this situation. You can find a link to the newly hosted wiki in the description of this video. We also have a new Discord server that is run by community members and isn't controlled by Jake. You can ask experienced community members for advice on how to do the reduced lens method. And finally, I just want to say, if you got to the end of this video, thanks for sticking around. It was a doozy. Keep improving your eyes, this still works. I read a lot of script for this. Until next time.